Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello and welcome to Nirmal, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Mr. Pronab Sen, former Chief Statistician of India, joining in. Welcome to the show, Mr. Sen, and a pleasure to have you on our show as well. My first question coming to you is, enough has been spoken so far right now as to what should have been done initially by the government, by the RBI, since the time COVID hit us, the kind of impact that we've already seen by now. However, if you have to take into consideration the stimulus package that the government announced, the stimulus measures that the RBI announced, what is your view up till now? Do you think we have seen the benefits of it, number one? And number two, do you think something more is still required?
Um, Look, as far as the initial step is concerned, the government imposed this clampdown, which was about 2 months. Um, Now, that actually, some states had done lockdowns before that. Some states continue to do lockdown now. So it's a mixed bag. But the bulk of the economic damage that you're talking about really comes during the period where the lockdown was national. There, the impact was massive. Now, that's not something that's going to go away in a hurry. We have lost about roughly 1.5 months worth of income for the year. That's a very large amount. You're talking about 12, 13% of GDP gone at one shot. Now, what has happened after that in terms of the government's response? The initial fiscal stimulus package that was announced was too small, and it really was more a social protection package rather than a stimulus package. So you were actually trying to prevent people from starving to death. Fair enough. I mean, that's at that point in time, I think that was the right response. What has happened subsequently is that the RBI has stepped in with a whole range of liquidity measures, which has had its desired effect, which is, I think, just to keep production units alive until markets open up and economic activity comes back to normal. So this is a survival strategy. It is not, and I repeat this, it is not a stimulus. It is in no way making up for the loss of income that the country has suffered. This will, has come now. Now the question is that as the lockdowns are being lifted, as things are slowly limping back to normal, will the demand sustain a steady growth from here on out? Now, everybody's looking at various indicators and saying green shoots and all of this, but none of that is very surprising. If you actually work out the mathematics of it, what it says is that in the first quarter, you should expect a large negative growth, somewhere between 25 to 35%. In the subsequent quarters, you will still record negative growth, but it will be probably somewhere around -5%. And in the fourth quarter, you could actually see positive growth. And first quarter of next year, a large positive growth because of the base effect. You shouldn't get deluded by this. What is important is not what the growth rate is. What is important is where is the overall level of income and production relative to what it was last year. We are going to be under that for a while. And the main reason for it is that people are, two things have happened. A lot of people have drawn down their savings. They're going to rebuild those savings because you never know when another crisis hits. The second, which is more important psychologically, people are still not fully convinced that COVID is behind us. It isn't behind us. And till such time as people are totally free of fear, they are going to play it safe. So you should expect demand to be muted for an extended period.
Mm,
Now, this is consumption demand that I'm talking. As far as investment is concerned,
mm,
even existing projects have been put on the back burner. New projects are not being taken. So
correct.
do not expect investment revival anytime this year or probably even next year. Investment demand will start picking up after that.
Mm,
So you've got two big drivers of growth which are not doing very much. That leaves essentially exports
mm,
and it leaves the government. Now, as far as exports are concerned, yes, exports have shrunk, but they haven't shrunk that much. The problem is we don't know how long because the global economy can actually keep slowing for a much longer period than we expect, in which case our exports are going to be hit. So it really leaves the government. Now, the government has to step in with a substantial stimulus package.
mm,
The real question is the timing. Do you do it now or do you wait a little bit more
mm,
till the production systems open up fully and can respond to the demand stimulus? The issue there is that what the RBI has done is going to keep firms afloat until September.
correct.
And if the demand stimulus doesn't come immediately after that, you're going to see a lot of firms going under because they simply will not be able to service debt.
Mm,
Okay, so to my mind, the deadline is the end of September when all moratoriums vanish at one shot.
right. So, if we are saying that the government needs to step in, timing is something which needs to be looked at, and end of September is something. But do you think there is a possibility of a second stimulus package that the government would announce? And if yes, what is the kind of direction the government should be taking in terms of the stimulus, according to you?
Well, you see, I think the form of the stimulus really should be determined
Hmm.
by the nature of the damage that you're expecting. Now, most observers, I think rightly, are saying that look, the real damage is to the MSME sector.
Correct.
The corporates are okay, they'll survive. Um, Now, if the damage is to the MSME sector, then you have to look at the type of government expenditures which actually directly creates demand for the MSMEs. So if you do investments which at the first round is buying goods and services from the corporate, there will be a trickle down effect.
Hmm.
But then the trickle down effect may be too late, right? So the government has to look at it, the kind of expenditures it can do to actually boost the MSMEs. Hmm? Now, there's a lot of things that can be done on this. One is that in terms of procurement by the government, and remember the center and state put together procure a lot of stuff,
Hmm.
uh, can for the time being be reserved for the MSME sector. And say only once things are back to normal will we go back to our original uh, method of looking at the most competitive bid. I think we need to get away from that for a while. Then you need to go in for small projects. You know, not national highways, which are again for large construction companies, but things like rural roads, things like rural housing, uh, urban reconstruction projects. All of these use local contractors, use local material, use local labor. Those are the kinds of things you need to focus
Right. So, when we're talking about, say, infrastructure, when we talk about agriculture, these are sectors right now which are actually providing labor to majority of the forces in terms of where India goes. If there is a delay now, right now as well, it's mainly agriculture which is keeping us afloat as well in terms of the economy, taking the other sectors into consideration. Infrastructure is where the government really needs to step in. Now, if the government does not step in on time in terms of where allotting projects for infrastructure goes, what could be the counter effect that we could see on the negative side, according to you?
You see, the thing is, yes, agriculture is keeping you afloat at the moment.
Hmm.
And the principal reason for it, there are two reasons for it,
Hmm.
is number one is that we've had a very good harvest. Okay. And the rains have been good. So, people are upbeat about the next harvest as well. The second is that the procurement operations of the government this time have been very good. So more has been procured than would otherwise have happened. So a lot more liquidity has been pushed out into the agricultural economy.
Hmm.
The problem is that agriculture's principal consumers are other rural people. And remember, 70% of our population is in rural India. Now, if these the rural consumers are unable to buy, then what you will see is that the prices of agricultural products will just keep going downwards.
Hmm.
Typically, what happens is that towards the end of the agricultural season, the agricultural prices go up. What you could expect to see is prices continuously weakening, in which case the farmers will lose the benefit that they gain from a good harvest.
Correct.
Because terms of trade would have shifted against them and they would get into a dire situation.
Hmm.
Now, there are only two ways you can tackle that. One way is to say that we'll give handouts. So we will continue to front load PM Kisan. But that's not a very good way because you're not reviving the market. At the end of the day, sustainability requires the market to be revived. The
Right.
second way is to really address the livelihood needs of those non-farm families in rural areas
Hmm.
who can actually buy the agricultural products. At the moment, they're not being able to.
Right. And with this, when we're talking about rural India as well, uh, at the Independence Day celebration, you had Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who came out and actually spoke of the National Digital Health Mission as well. Now, do you think that's something which is important to be done right now? And secondly, the suggestion that the national infrastructure pipeline will be the vehicle for used for providing a boost to the economy. Now, both of these have been spoken about. How important and how uh, doable are they in this time? And what will be the impact that we could see on the economy, according to you?
Okay, let me take the national infrastructure pipeline part
Hmm,
of it
hmm,
first,
hmm.
uh, because that is critical.
Correct.
Now the point is, we know that the infrastructure pipeline has a huge number of projects that are there.
Hmm.
What we do not know is what is the state of readiness of those projects. You have to be able to identify those projects which can be launched tomorrow.
Hmm.
If you now start working on saying, okay, let's get this project off the ground, it could take you 5, 6, 7 months before you've got all the required bits and pieces in place. So the urgency of the situation means that in the pipeline, whatever are the projects in the pipeline, you prioritize them in terms of which can be launched now and which will need time to be launched. And you just go with the ones that you can launch today, right? That's the answer. That pipeline is important, but somebody has to sit down and do a careful appraisal of the state of each project. The second thing, uh, on the health issue.
Hmm.
Now, the digital health initiative is a long-term problem. The fact of the matter is that you can link
Hmm.
the a person's health uh, status with his Aadhaar and issue this card. The problem, of course, is populating it is going to take a hell of a lot of time.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to ask me for my medical history, how am I going to give it to you? At the moment, and it's not going to solve the immediate problem. So that is, I think, a long-term vision. It's a good vision. If we can have it, and make things a lot easier for the medical system. But at the moment, I think the focus should be on the fact that your primary healthcare system
Mm.
desperately needs money now,
Correct.
very desperately. Now, this has been by and large been handled by the state governments, but almost every state has essentially spent almost its entire annual budget already. It's almost gone and done.
Mm.
So they have no money to put into the health infrastructure.
Right.
So I would say that again, the immediate focus would be to strengthen the primary healthcare system,
Mm.
get this backbone starting to work,
Mm. Mm.
because it's going to take you time. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 years
Mm.
before that uh, the digital health infrastructure is going to be in place.
Right. So, Mr. San, if everything falls in place, if the government steps in the right direction, uh, yes, we know that growth is going to be negative for some time from here on. But in terms of the recovery, as per the data, whatever gets available to us right now, because I'm sure household surveys are not really happening because of the pandemic. So that data on the consumption side is something which is not really going to be available. What's the kind of recovery are you expecting for the Indian economy? Because lots have been spoken about. Yes, it could be a V-shaped recovery. Probably it could be a W-shaped recovery as well, where we would just see something up, again a fall that could come in, and that's when the real uptrend would start. What's the sense that you pick up on the recovery side of the Indian economy in comparison to the other developed and emerging markets?
Well, you see, if you go by growth rates,
Hmm.
then it will look like a W.
Hmm.
Okay, large fall, fairly large rise, large fall again, and
Hmm.
then sustain.
Hmm.
But if you look at the trajectory of income,
Hmm.
which is the quarterly GDP,
Correct.
that's going to be a long U.
Hmm.
It's going to be an extended U happening.
Correct. Right. And with this recovery as well, again from the government side, what we need to understand is that yes, the government is not really going to be able to come and help every sector in every possible way in the kind of representations that have been made. Now, if they have to come out with a second stimulus package as well, taking into consideration the important sectors they look at, I'm sure they will have to go ahead and rationalize some bit of their expenditure as well. If they have to rationalize expenditure, which are the areas that the government should look at in terms of rationalization?
There is a genuine problem out here, which is that the government's sort of discretionary spend is actually pretty small.
Mm.
A very large part of the expenditure of government, both center and state,
Mm.
are on items where they have absolutely no discretion. These are wages and salaries, pensions, interest payments, and so on. So the discretionary spend component is actually pretty small. It's about 20 to 25%, depending on who you're looking at. Now, reallocating in those can be a little problematic.
Mm.
Uh, but the first thing is that, for God's sake, if you have some project or some scheme that is running today and is operational, is there in the field, please don't stop it or cut it back, because that's where you can spend the fastest. All right. So when you're going to give an additional stimulus,
Mm.
it has to be an additionality over and above that. Right? Now, how do you finance it?
Mm.
Well, the thing is that in any case, the fact of the matter is, because of the reduction in the GDP this year, your taxes are going to be down, and the additional borrowing program that the government has announced of 2% of GDP is just about going to cover the tax losses and the losses in non-tax revenues. It's not going to be over and above that.
Correct.
So that if the government really has to scale up its expenditure side, it is either going to have to borrow more, or, well, it is really borrowing, which is monetize the deficit.
Correct.
All right. Now the question that then arises, and this the financial sector people would be better placed to say, is that, please expect about 4% of GDP additional borrowing by the center and the states.
Correct.
My sense is this much the market will be able to absorb without any dramatic change. The problem is, how far above that can I go? Can I go to 6%? Can I go to 8%? We need to have a sense of that, and I frankly don't have it.
Right. So, but with this, when we're talking about monetization of the deficit, what is the kind of timing do you think we should be looking at where the RBI will be ready to directly go ahead and monetize? Because that's something which we will have to look at if the government debt will increase, taking into consideration what the state as well as the center would probably borrow.
Yeah, this is, you see, so I said, things have become a little complicated now. At the moment, the RBI is in the unenviable situation where we are actually running a balance of payments surplus, a substantial one, right? So there is almost automatic money creation that is happening because of the foreign exchange that is coming in. Now, if in a situation of that kind, the space available for the RBI to monetize at the moment is kind of limited. So, because after all, the economy can absorb only so much cash at one go.
Correct.
Right? Now, if your foreign exchange interventions are taking up that space, and look, it's an unenviable choice. Supposing the RBI says, okay, I will not intervene in the foreign exchange market, then what's going to happen is the rupee is going to appreciate.
Correct.
When the rupee appreciates, you're going to have your exports coming down, which means that there's going to be a further reduction in your demand, and things would get actually worse. So it's, as I said, it's not an easy place to be.
Absolutely. And, and one thing which is commendable is the kind of action that the RBI has taken at the initial part of the lockdown with regards to where the rate cuts go. At the last policy MPC meeting as well, the broad anticipation was that the RBI is not really going to cut rates. They do have some bit of room right now. They will wait it out and see, when's the right time. What's the sense, Mr. Sen, you have on it? Because the entire policy, if you go to see, they've paused rates. However, the anticipation is that the further easing is likely, and they've clearly focused on restructuring of loans. Now, do you think that's the step in the right direction? Or do you think restructuring of loans, the moratorium that has been provided, all of this put together could somewhere be troublesome for the banking sector, say 18 to 24 months down the line, because that's something which could probably turn into NPA someday?
Look, that's going to happen anyway, right? You're going to see a whole bunch of NPAs appearing in October itself, right? These are ones will be the ones where restructuring is not done.
Correct.
So the moratorium is only till the end of September, and those which don't get their loans restructured are going to become NPAs in October itself. Almost your entire bunch of mudra loans, which have been pretty much on a moratorium since last year, September, they're all going to be going. So in any case, expect that damage. The question is, what does the restructuring do? And you're right, it simply kicks the can down the road. The hope being that in that interim period, there is sufficient demand revival to make the company solvent. If the demand revival does not happen, then it makes the situation even worse, because then their liabilities will just continue to pile up, and they're all going to become MPS in a very short period of time, rather than spread out over a long.
So with this, if they have to go ahead and cut rates further as well, how much more room do you think that the RBI has?
Well, again, I think one of the things that's important is to recognize that the rate cut works when it is able to incentivize investments or consumer loans. All right? Today, we are in a situation where none of that is going to happen. And doing a rate cut today means that you're wasting an arrow. So it's better to hold the rate cut off till you see some signs of investor interest return. And that's when you give a rate cut. And in any case, the space you have left is only about 50 basis points.
Okay. So with this, how important will it be for the government to look at what happens on the inflation side? What is the level which is a number that is maintainable? Because as we know, the CPI, which did come in at almost 6.93, and the core inflation number also for the month of July, that's something which has given you an indication that probably the RBI could look at delayed rate cuts. So what is the threshold inflation number that we could still wait and watch?
Well, the fact is we have become so obsessive with the CPI. We forget that there is something called the WPI around as well, right? And you do know what the WPI has been up to, right? It's been in negative territory for 4 consecutive months. So remember that it's the WPI which is of consequence to producers. It's not the CPI. The CPI is important for consumers and for the trading community. But for producers, it is the WPI. Now, for producers, if you're actually seeing a deflation happening, I mean, that should set alarm bells ringing.
So, even if, it's raising alarms right now to us right now, we're talking of, all negative indications. And if you have to look at India returning back to growth, what we saw in FY20, how far are we from getting back to that normal growth?
Well, let's not talk about growth as yet, because as I said, because of a lot of base effects playing out, the growth numbers are going to be very volatile for the next year and a half. Let's talk about the level of GDP.
Correct.
That is what we should be focusing on. And as I said, it's going to take us at least a year, maybe longer, to get back to the FY20 GDP numbers. Okay? It's only after we've got back to that should we really start thinking about growth. Because then you could say that you have gotten over the effects of COVID. Till then, you're still suffering those effects.
Correct. Right. And with this, what are the sectors? We've spoken about infrastructure, we've spoken about agriculture. Which are the other sectors which really need to step in to start getting back to normalcy, according to you?
Well, the thing is that really manufacturing is at the heart simply because it has such strong backward linkages. And therefore, we really need to focus on manufacturing a lot. The problem with manufacturing is that there is a sort of a very strong link
Hmm.
between different size of companies in the manufacturing space and the nature of the markets that they address. And this is where the problem is. So corporates, which by and large address the middle class and up, they are doing okay because we are doing okay.
Hmm.
The MSMEs who are looking at the lower middle class and the lower income groups, they are suffering, and that's becoming a syndrome
Hmm.
because it's the MSMEs who employ the bulk of workers. So it's actually getting reflected in a downward spiral at that end. And as I said, so that's why we need to focus in on that category.
Hmm.
But that really is at the heart of it. Now you've got the entire leisure sector, the hospitality and leisure sector.
Hmm.
Now that's not going to be doing anything until the fear of COVID dissipates,
Correct.
right? And there's nothing much you can do about it except for persuading the banking sector to
Hmm.
keep them alive.
Hmm.
You certainly cannot. There is no instrument that I know that the government can use to step up, demand for these activities.
Right. And how important do you think to drive demand right now? How important it is for the government to come ahead and even support the urban poor, because rural poor is something where the support has been provided. Now, if you talk about urban poor, that's the sect that has always been ignored. Now, till demand is not created there, you will not see at least that pickup happening with regards to, say, metros, or even with regards to tier one or the initial stages of tier two cities. How important is support needed on that front as well, according to you?
It's very important, and you're absolutely right. We have lost 4 months and done nothing about it because if you really look at what happened, the real employment damage
Mm,
was in urban India.
correct.
Right? It wasn't in rural India. Rural India got the overflow of what was happening in urban India because of the reverse migration. So the reverse migration is really a reflection of what was happening in urban India. But the fact of the matter is that those workers who don't have a village to go back to, who are urban residents, are suffering and they're continuing to suffer.
Mm,
And nothing has been done so far. And we have lost a lot of time. There's been a lot of talk about the urban equivalent of the NREGS. But, frankly, talk is not good enough. We really do need action and we need
correct.
action now.
Absolutely. And I'll interrupt over here on the reverse migration bit, because even if you have to look at rural India, there is a lot of interdependence of rural India on the urban side, because a lot of remittances of the migrant labor that actually happen from the urban to the rural. Now, when they've already migrated, they've not really taken anything back with them. For how long will they sustain in rural, in the villages? Because one of the days they will have to come back. Until they don't come back, till there's no growth or there's no work happening in the urban side, we are not going to see anything. It's going to be like stagnation over here.
No, it will be worse because
Hmm.
you're absolutely right. Uh, in rural India, what has happened is that agriculture has done well,
Hmm.
but agriculture would have done exactly the same whether you had extra workers or not.
Hmm.
These people who have gone back to the village are not adding anything to agricultural incomes. Now, the problem is, as you said, that these were the people who were sending remittances,
Hmm.
and those remittances were propping up the general rural economy.
Hmm.
Okay, this is beyond agriculture, agriculture plus other rural activities.
Hmm.
These remittances are gone. On the other hand, these people have gone back, 17 to 18 million people. So there's an additional mouth to feed in the village,
Hmm.
correct? Which means that the level of deprivation in rural India has probably gone up quite significantly,
Hmm.
right? So
Correct.
supporting rural India is important,
Hmm.
but Supporting it through directly addressing the farmer is not going to be the solution. The farmers are okay. They will not be okay if farm prices drop, but farm prices will drop if and only if the non-farm workers don't have work.
Right. And very lastly, Mr. Sen, everyone's actually saying that probably even the government is actually waiting out that whether there is a vaccine that comes out. That's when we will probably see things returning back to normal. But do you think dependence on a vaccine for COVID is something what the economy can actually look at, or do you think that's something which absolutely needs to be ignored right now? In the way, I mean, in terms of the interdependence, where the vaccine is on one side, but the government looking at the economy in terms of revival, in terms of getting back to normal, should be completely on a separate note.
Well, the real issue, I think, I mean, I'm no expert on this, is the fear of death that comes from COVID, right? Now, what the vaccine does is it prevents the disease from taking hold. But if we can actually get treatments which means that even if you are infected, you're not going to die.
Mm.
We all of us live with the common cold and the flu virus.
Mm.
And there is no social distancing that happens during the flu season.
Right.
Correct? Sooner or later, we will have to move to something like that for COVID as well.
Mm.
The question is, what will do it? Will it be the vaccine? And therefore, my concern that if my neighbor in office is not vaccinated, then he's a danger to me.
Correct.
I mean, these kinds of things are going to play through people's mind. I
Mm.
think we'd be best off if we can get to a situation where says, "Acha, theek hai, COVID ho gaya, koi badi."
Correct. I mean, yeah, that's something. I mean, at least there's peace of mind within people once it happens, and you have the antibodies, and you're like, okay, we are at peace. We can start moving out. We can start work safely. Absolutely. So there is a lot of interdependence that we're seeing right now, and I think a lot, across needs to be done, and it's not only the government, even from the corporates. We need to take action across and in terms of work as well. I think more than competition, co-opetition is something that we need to opt for to get on the revival track. But thank you so much, Mr. Sen, for joining us. Great insights that we've picked up today
Not
from
at
you.
all.
I hope you enjoyed the discussion as well, and
I
we
did
will come
indeed.
back to you once again, once things start improving and we see more developments happening across. But thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you at Nirmal Bang.
Thank you, Hiral. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.